At just 14 years old, he was already living alone in New York. He had no friends, and he stumbled into his family's darkest secret. But now Adam Silver is one of the most well-liked figures in all of sports, even after he almost blew off the old commissioner of the NBA. So how did he get here? And what was Silver's secret to becoming the most powerful man in basketball without ever playing the sport himself? Because there was a specific strategy he used to go from special assistant to the commissioner with no basketball experience to commissioner of the league in 22 years. Well, we're about to find out, because this is the story of the accidental rise of Adam Silver. Adam Silver was born on April 25th, 1962 in Rye, New York, a wealthy suburb north of the city that was home to just 15,000, most of whom were wealthy corporate executives and investment bankers. But while Adam grew up in a big fancy house, his father, Ed Silver, did not. See, Ed didn't grow up wealthy. He fought in World War II and put himself through law school with help from the GI Bill. But he quickly rose to become one of the most prominent labor lawyers in New York City. Adam recalls sitting in his dad's downtown office and admiring the plaques he had collected from several mayors for his work resolving massive labor strikes across transit, garbage, and other major city sectors. Colleagues called Ed, quote, the kind of lawyer who was discussed with almost as much praise on the other side of the table. However, at home, he was a much different person. For being a senior partner at his law firm, Ed was actually quite reserved and soft-spoken, a trait which he passed down to his youngest son, Adam. Adam's mother, Melba, on the other hand, was anything but quiet, working as a teacher and community activist in Rye. Adam fondly remembers the summer that his mother spent leading a campaign to ban a bridge that was set to be built in their hometown. And even though the bridge didn't directly affect the Silvers' home, Melba led the charge against construction that would have had massive polluting effects in the area. She successfully prevented the bridge from being built with the help of a young Adam Silver. Melba then went on to open her own alternative high school called Educage, which emphasized the arts while allowing students to smoke in class. And it was this sort of yin and yang that defined Adam's childhood. He grew comfortable hanging around the fast-paced, brash lawyers who worked at his father's firm, like David Stern and Gary Bettman, while also gaining a deep understanding for the arts and community activism. But then, at the age of 10, his life would be turned upside down. See, in 1972, Adam's parents separated, which resulted in his dad moving into a Manhattan apartment and his mom keeping the large Georgian house Adam and his 3 older siblings grew up in. However, once his other siblings left for college just a few years later, his mom started spending winters in Boca Raton, Florida. This meant that a 14-year-old Adam Silver was left living alone for a large portion of his childhood. His mother employed a housekeeper during the day and rented out the house's back unit to a couple with the understanding that they'd keep an eye on Adam. But this isolation from his family made a quiet, shy kid become even more reserved. Adam recalls his mom opening a charge account for him at a grocery store a mile away from their house. But at just 14 years old, Adam was too young to even drive to the store. However, he now admits that he would sometimes drive himself there without a license. One silver lining of this whole arrangement, however, came by the way of a new student at Rye High School named Jerry. See, Jerry was the son of a counselor to Malawi's UN ambassador who moved to Rye when he was just 10 years old. Being so new to the country, Jerry didn't have many friends and was one of the few black kids in the community. To make matters even worse, his parents would regularly travel back to Malawi, often leaving him alone in his new country. Luckily for him, however, he ran into a kid in a similar situation at a party during his freshman year. Neither were drinking, and the two immediately hit it off. Jerry describes how from that point forward, him and Adam became inseparable, almost like brothers. Adam would tutor Jerry in history and algebra, invite him to concerts and sporting events in the city, take him to fancy restaurants, and even sold him his car, a Volkswagen Scirocco, for $2,000 on a payment plan. In return, Jerry spent hours with Adam shooting hoops and just hanging out. As one classmate put it, Adam was Jerry's guide through the American experience. But Adam was just happy for the company. Both Adam and Jerry attended Rye High School in 1976, where Adam was an A student, class president, member of the cross-country and track team, editor-in-chief of the school newspaper, and even enjoyed playing the stock market. He didn't grow until later in high school, eventually reaching 6'3", so playing basketball was never on the table. But it quickly became his favorite sport to watch. See, there was never a formal custody agreement set up for Adam to see his father in the city, so it was always up to him to make arrangements with his dad and take the 40-minute train in to see him. Their favorite thing to do together was go to Madison Square Garden and watch the Knicks play. Ed had season tickets 15 rows behind the team's bench, and while he may have been quiet and reserved at home, Adam remembers him being anything but during these games. It was here that Adam says he really got to know his dad and where their relationship developed. It's also where Adam decided he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps and become a lawyer, but not before his life would change forever. Silver graduated from Rye High School in 1980 and attended Duke to study political science, which just so happened to be the same year where a little-known coach from Army named Mike Krzyzewski was hired. Here, he continued his regiment of following the stock market, but it's also where his fascination with good storytelling and media started. His roommates recall Silver getting the New York Times delivered to their dorm every day so he could check the markets and read the editorial page. A former family friend always said that Silver would have made a great sports writer, but for now, he was studying to go a different direction. Now, not long before graduating from Duke, Silver was visiting his mother for the holidays in Boca Raton, Florida. He had plans to travel up to Rye to see some friends, including Jerry, after the trip, but with one phone call, that all changed. See, Jerry had been out drinking with a classmate of his and Adam Silver's named Chris Pinto. That night, Jerry met a girl and invited her to his car. That's when she called him the N-word, and when two guys outside of the bar started antagonizing Chris. Suddenly, a fight broke out and Jerry stepped in to protect Chris, but not before he was knocked unconscious. Jerry went home bloodied, but Chris was sent to the hospital and died a few days later. Jerry was distraught, and not knowing what to do, he called Adam, who flew up early from Boca Raton to console his mourning friend. Jerry blamed himself for the incident, and Adam tried to remind him that it wasn't his fault. The two men who started the fight were tried, but never found guilty for Chris's death, which sent Jerry into a spiral that caused him to undergo counseling and nearly drop out of college. And soon after the incident, Jerry decided to move back to Malawi to be closer to his family. As a token of his appreciation for their friendship, Adam shipped Jerry the Volkswagen Sirocco he had bought from him almost a decade prior. But now, Silver's one childhood friend was gone. However, he was only looking forward because he still had to figure out what the heck he was going to do with his life. When Silver eventually graduated from Duke in 1984 with a poli-sci degree, he decided to put off law school and work as a legislative aide to Congressman Les Coyne for a year. The next year, Silver started at the University of Chicago Law School, where he handled cases in the school's legal aid clinic for victims of housing and employment discrimination who couldn't otherwise afford lawyers. At the time, it might have been more beneficial for Silver's career to focus on the sort of big corporate cases that get a young law student noticed by big New York City firms. But he tended to stay away from those cases and focus on areas he knew he could have the greatest impact. Upon graduating with a law degree in 1988, Silver clerked for federal judge Kimball Wood. Here, he would make a name for himself in just the first month by taking both sides of his very first case into a settlement. Judge Wood recalls being astounded by Silver's ability to settle dozens of cases for her, demonstrating an unusual ability to locate middle ground and nudge both parties forward to it. According to many people, Silver was on the path to becoming a managing partner at one of New York City's top law firms, just like his dad. And by 1989, he had joined one of those top law firms as an associate as to not let his father down. But by his third year in 1992, he was working 110 hours a week on dead-end cases and hating his life. He did, however, find a particular fascination with some of the media cases he was working on. One client in particular piqued his interest, Turner Broadcasting. See, at the time, Turner was using its cable channels, TNT and TBS, to air NBA games on cable, something virtually no other sports league was doing. Intrigued by this model and inspired by the NBA commissioner David Stern's forward thinking in the world of media, Silver decided to reach out and ask for advice on how he could make the leap from law to media.
Fortunately, this is where I got really lucky that David Stern had worked at the same law firm my father had worked at. And I didn't know David Stern, and I wrote a bunch of people letters, old-fashioned, put them in the mail letters. Yes. And his office called me some number of weeks after I sent him a letter. And the letter was, Dear Commissioner Stern, my father is Edward Silver, and I'm a lawyer at Cravath, Swaine & Moore, the firm I worked at in New York. And if you would ever have any time to give me advice, I'd really appreciate it, because I was thinking he was someone who had made the transition from being, he had been a lawyer for a while. He rose to level of partner at a firm in New York, and then went over to the NBA as the general counsel, then became a commissioner. But I thought, here's a guy who was a lawyer, made this transition. And interestingly enough, I was not thinking at the time that my goal was to work in the Sunshine.
Stern ended up giving Silver the name of someone at Turner Broadcasting to reach out to and see if they might have a job for him. However, Silver never made that call, which didn't sit right with Commissioner Stern.
I never called this guy. And I remember several weeks later, and essentially said, I can't believe you wasted my time. You asked me for advice. I gave you advice. I suggest you call this guy, and you never called this guy. So that, of course, David was always a step ahead. So he then said, well, why didn't you just tell me you weren't interested in that job? He said, call my assistant. I want you to come back and see me. I have something else I want to talk to you about. So I said, okay. And that's when I went back to see him. That's when he first suggested, maybe there's an opportunity at the NBA to be my assistant.
Now, the offer from Stern also came with a pretty significant pay cut from what Silver was earning at the prestigious law firm he currently worked at. But as Silver recalls, the deciding factor came for him one night in February of 1992, when he was working another late night at the office. He wanted so badly to watch the NBA All-Star game that was on that night, so he taped it, and when he got home at midnight, he watched the entire game. Silver vividly remembers watching Lakers star Magic Johnson hit a fadeaway last-second shot after going off for 25 points and sitting alone in his apartment in tears. 5 months later, Silver took Stern up on his offer to come on as his special assistant, but he could have never prepared for what was about to happen next. During his first year with the NBA, many described a 30-year-old Adam Silver as married to the league. He was still single and was used to doing things alone given his isolated childhood. This meant he was okay giving his entire self to his new career of basketball. But just half a year in, he was set on a very different trajectory. See, just 6 months after Silver joined the league, its then head of media, Gary Bettman, left to become the first commissioner of the NHL. This meant Stern, and in turn Silver, was left responsible for many of Bettman's media responsibilities, which was great for Silver because it was the area of the league he found himself most interested in. Silver describes his first year with the NBA as a lot of listening. Stern would have him sit in on meetings to better understand the business of what was becoming the modern NBA. And while Silver wasn't yet responsible for much, his skills were undeniable. Stern would often compare Silver to his father Ed, but he proved to be a much more open and engaging person. Silver's unique upbringing and friendships meant he had a unique ability to relate with virtually anyone of any background. An important skill when dealing with both young, predominantly black athletes and old, rich white owners. But possibly his most impressive skill was his ability to innovate based on feedback from fans, players, and teams. For example, Silver was responsible for the NBA being the first American sports league to incorporate team websites in 1995, and then in 1999, the NBA became the first league to launch its own cable network. Silver's interest in media eventually landed him as president and COO of NBA Entertainment, where he was the executive producer of the IMAX movie Jordan to the Max and the documentary Whatever Happened to Michael Ray. He also helped produce films like Mike and The Year of Yao. And the success of these projects helped land Silver the title of Deputy Commissioner in 2006, his 5th job with the league in 14 years. Here, he would help settle the 2011 NBA lockout and negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement that gave players more mobility and power than ever. He'd also be responsible for resolving the historic Malice at the Palace, the Tim Donaghy point-shaving scandal, the development of the WNBA and G League, the creation of NBA China, and the overwhelming success of the NBA's digital strategy. But as Silver was having all of this professional success, he received a personal bombshell that would reshape how he looked at his entire childhood. See, in 2004, Silver's mom died of lung cancer. Later that same year, Silver's father also died from pancreatic cancer. It was then, while Silver and his siblings were mourning, that they received a call from a woman named Emily Guerre in Cleveland. Emily told the Silver siblings that she was actually their half-sister, from a relationship Ed Silver had with their mother years ago while the two worked together in New York City. Emily was 4 years younger than Adam, and he immediately remembered calls he used to get at the house from Emily's mother asking to speak with his father. Adam recalls always being too nervous to tell his father about the calls or reveal the truth to his mother, so he just kept the woman a secret from everyone. Now, keeping a secret like that for as long as Silver did could have easily bred resentment with his dad or even Emily. But Adam welcomed Emily into their family with open arms, happily assuming the title of uncle to her 2 children. Now, at this point in the video, I could go one of 2 ways. I could talk about how Adam Silver has ruined the NBA since he was voted commissioner in 2012 by giving the players too much power and making the game too soft. Or I could talk about how he's been one of the most forward-thinking commissioners in all of sports, reinventing everything from the draft to the regular season to the playoffs. But I'm actually not going to talk about either of those things, because I think in order to understand who Adam Silver really is and where he plans to take the league in the next few decades, there's a much more important story to understand. I want to take you back to October 2019. For months, millions of people in Hong Kong had been protesting a proposed law that would allow prisoners to be sent to mainland China. A law that many Hong Kong residents feared would threaten their freedoms and bring them closer to Chinese rule. In support of the protesters, Houston Rockets GM Daryl Morey tweeted this image, which drew backlash from the Chinese government. That's because the NBA has an extensive relationship with China, and the Rockets are specifically beloved in the country because of Yao Ming. But Morey's tweet angered Chinese officials. In fact, he had to delete the post and issue a statement 2 days later, clarifying that he never intended to cause any offense. However, Adam Silver went a step further and called the tweet regrettable, a comment that drew criticism from both Republicans and Democrats. But Silver doubled down on the league's response the following day, stating that he supports Morey's right to freedom of expression while also accepting the right of reply from the government and business of China. Basically saying to the NBA, you can say what you want, but if what you say negatively impacts the business, I'm going to kindly ask you to shut up. And this perfectly embodies the demeanor of Adam Silver, because unlike his mentor David Stern, he isn't one to lecture or bully. Instead, he's known as a listener and consensus builder. One executive even said that he's the kind of guy you appreciate even when he says screw you. But there is a downside to wanting to listen to too many people's opinions. One that Adam Silver even admits has caused the league to steer off course when it comes to one key issue.
Also, back to an earlier point where I think that, I and the league lost its focus a bit, is that, we went down that road of so-called load management.
Now, to a casual NBA fan, this point seems obvious. But when you trace back the origins of load management, you realize that it only really started to rise when Silver took over. And this is largely because Silver didn't want to be known as a bully like his old boss David Stern, but rather as a progressive commissioner who relaxed a lot of the league's strict rules. But even Silver admits that he's now looking to go a different direction.
I see my goal as helping the league, I call it for shorthand, to become more NFL-like. And by that I mean, historically, I think if you asked a casual fan, are you going to watch the NBA Finals? They would say, well, who's going to be in it? And if you asked a casual NFL fan, are you going to watch the Super Bowl? They'd hardly ever say only if the Giants are in it. It's a national holiday. And I think a part of, my job is to take people who are fans of the game back to where we started, and by definition, create interest in whoever the teams are that are most successful.
And I think this is his very subtle way of signaling to players and the rest of the league that his focus for the next decade is going to be urgency. The one thing the NFL has over the NBA is the fact that its regular season games matter. And as the NBA looks to re-up their media rights in an estimated $75 billion deal, it's going to be more important than ever that star players aren't taking games off for load management. But honestly, I could see Silver taking the idea of urgency even further by altering the way contracts are done to make it easier for teams to retain their star players, or even reducing the number of regular season games to make each one mean more. Because if we've learned anything about Adam Silver, it's that he'll hear out any idea if he thinks it'll help the game of basketball.